Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of It Matters How We Treat One Another, the social psychology show. I'm your host, Matthew David Vasco. If you have subscribed to this show on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, then thank you. This is a new show, and we are grateful for each and every one of our subscribers. If you haven't subscribed yet, then please consider doing so. We've got lots more exciting episodes and guests coming up, and you don't want to miss a single one. Today's guest is the editor of Greater Good magazine, Jeremy Adam Smith. Jeremy will be with us to talk about the magazine's annual Greater Goody Awards and 12 movies that can help us see the best in humanity. If you want to add some feel-good movies to your must-watch list, then you'll want to be sure to stay tuned for that. We open today with our Inspiring News segment. If inspiring things are happening in your neck of the woods, then please email me at mdvasco@gmail.com and let me know. That's M as in Matthew, D as in David, VASKO @gmail.com. This week's inspiring news comes from right here in the state of California, USA. Sometimes inspiring things happen right here in my neck of the woods. And in 2019, the state of California passed a law requiring that the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Lifeline appear on the back of all student ID cards for grades 7 through 12 and college student IDs. This could literally save lives. I've got what a card could look like here. Could be something like that. This one says 24/7 supports available to you. Call National Suicide Hotline. And this one's a little bit old, so it's still got the 800 number on it. But there is actually now a 3-digit National Suicide Hotline number, and that number is 988. If you're ever in crisis and need to call someone, simply dial 988. This card also says text home to 741-741 to text with a crisis counselor. And I double checked, and that is still the right way to text to a crisis counselor. Simply text HOME to 741-741. So that is now on the back of every student ID in the state of California for grades 7 and up, including college. So that's pretty fantastic. I think what makes this story, this fact, this news so exciting and inspiring, and why I have it on the inspiring news segment, is because it's something that literally any person, a student, a parent, or simply a concerned citizen could advocate for right in their own school or school district. You don't necessarily need to work on this kind of change on the state level. I mean, it happened on the state level here in California, but if you're somewhere else in the world and just want to advocate for it right there in your local community, it's something you can do, and you could have student ID cards like this with that important information right on the back for any student who might be in crisis. So, and like I said, that could save lives. So again, if you know of any inspiring news happening in your area, please email me at mdvasco@gmail.com. Thanks. And now on to our interview. I am here with Jeremy Adam Smith. Jeremy Adam Smith edits the Greater Good Science Center's online magazine, Greater Good. He is also the author or co-editor of 5 books, including The Daddy Shift, Are We Born Racist? And most recently, The Gratitude Project, how the science of thankfulness can rewire our brains for resilience, optimism, and the greater good. Before joining GGSC, Jeremy was a John S. Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford University. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hello, good to be here.
Thanks for being here. I am so excited to have you as a guest. I have been a fan of Greater Good magazine for easily a decade.
Hmm.
I mean, I just love all that you all contribute toward positive psychology and social psychology. It's just such a pleasure to be reading articles about really how we can be better to each other and how
Yeah,
in doing so it's good for us,
yeah,
right? Good for each of us individually.
yeah,
So
that's a good
really
summary
a
of what we
very,
do.
very positive message coming from Greater Good. I just love it. Just love it. So I thought maybe we could touch upon your latest work briefly. Try to interest people in buying that one. Um, the Gratitude Project. So what's that one about?
We had a 3-year project on gratitude that had two components. One involved the science. We basically funded scientists all over the world to research gratitude, like on every level, as something that happens inside of our bodies and inside of our minds, something that happens between people, something that can be manifest in human families and organizations and institutions. Um, and the other half was journalistic. That was the part I was in charge of. And we turned a lot of that original research into articles for the magazine for a popular audience. And we also, went to a lot of researchers who weren't necessarily funded by the project and asked them to explore gratitude in a very nuanced way. And that book, The Gratitude Project, collects many of those essays and organizes them according to different themes and explores gratitude in all of its manifestations.
Wonderful. So maybe what are some of the recommendations that came out of all of this research? Do you recommend something like a daily gratitude practice or a gratitude journal? Some of these things we've heard of before.
Yeah, one of the quirky things about gratitude is that you can't have too much of it. Like the gratitude journal has been shown over and over again to be a really strong intervention for personal well-being. And the reason for that is because we human beings have a very strongly hardwired negativity bias. That means
Mm,
that we tend to focus on threats. And you can understand why evolution might have made us that way because we don't want to get hit by cars.
sure.
Or attacked by lions or whatever. Like we see things that might be a threat to us, and we avoid them. And in that way, we live longer and we can pass on our genes, etc. So it's understandable that evolution made us that way. However, uh, that can result in dysregulation because we can
Mm,
get too focused on the negative.
mhm.
Gratitude is a cognitive override, a kind of prefrontal cortex override for that naturally hardwired negativity bias. So we're taking the spotlight of our attention and we're focusing it on what's good in our lives and on the people that make those good things, that participate in the good things of our lives. And that's why gratitude is so important. So, gratitude journal, yes, absolutely. Like just making sure that you're tracking those good things is very important. But it's funny, a lot of studies have shown that keeping it every day is actually kind of a mistake. Like what you want to do
Mm.
is like 2 or 3 times a week, because if you do it, because there's another psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. And this is the tendency to get accustomed to the good things and the bad things in our lives, right?
Ah,
Uh, we humans do that all the time. You can be in a bad situation, you can think to yourself, "I'll never survive this," but guess what? You get used to it. And by the same token, the same thing can happen with the good things in our lives. And so, I think the reason why the gratitude journal is such a good intervention, and the reason why it's a good idea to maybe do it 2 or 3 times a week instead of every day is that it kind of keeps it fresh.
Ah,
uh, and kind of helps us, snap out of our daily sleepwalking and wake up a little. And
mhm.
that's really, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do.
I
Uh,
see.
yeah.
Kind of like a mindfulness practice then.
There is many of our articles and much of the research focuses on the links between gratitude and mindfulness.
Excellent. Excellent. And then I was also intrigued by this title, Are We Born Racist?
Yeah.
Uh, I sure hope not.
No, the answer is no.
Are we born racist?
So, yeah, I mean, we obviously chose a very provocative title. The greater good has a dimension of our work that is really focused on how different kinds of human beings can get along and take care of each other. And there's a lot of barriers to that. One of those barriers is racism. Um, and that strain of our work really began with a series of neuroscientific studies that I believe came out in like the late 90s, early 21st century, um, that showed that we actually have a very automatic reaction to our brains, react in kind of negative ways when we see people who are very different from us or very different from the people that we're used to. And I think that a lot of the headlines at the time said, "Oh, human beings are born racist.
Mm.
We have it's racism is natural, et cetera, et cetera." However, that was not the complete story.
Oh.
As that research advanced, and they did more neuroscientific studies as well as social psychology studies, it was discovered that those reactions are actually very changeable. As we get used to people, I mean, it's very simple. This goes back to hedonic adaptation, actually. A lot of these things sort of link back together. It seems like you're talking about racism and you're talking about gratitude. It can seem very disparate, right?
Mhm.
It's like one of those things is not like the other. However, the underlying psychological mechanisms are very similar. You know, you can get used to people who are different from you. But you got to make the effort, or somebody needs to
Sure.
make the effort for you, like your parents, for example, and exposing you to a lot of different kinds of people. And what they found over time is that when that happens, we simply get used to difference. I mean, it's kind
Wow.
of in a way that simple. So that was kind of the beginning question, and where the title comes from. Are we born racist? Um, but that was the foundation. But then we layered on top of that an exploration of the psychology of racism and prejudice and xenophobia and how that works and how we can overcome it. Um, and there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, I can explore that if you want to, if you're curious. But there are ways to overcome those barriers to compassion and to empathy and to connection with other people.
Yeah. Well, maybe that I can interview you again sometime in the future. We can delve deeper into this topic. I'm certainly intrigued.
Well, it's certainly
Um,
going to come up when we talk about movies.
excellent, excellent. Yes, that is why we are here today. We are here to talk about 12 movies that can help us see the best in humanity. And I look forward to this article every year. I'm a movie
Okay.
buff. I enjoy a good movie, and I often complain that movies have a bad tendency to sort of show us the worst in
Yeah,
ourselves, right?
yeah,
Holding a mirror up to man, as they say.
yeah,
So I always look forward to this article from Greater Good because it's nice to be reminded that there are movies out there that show us the best in ourselves.
yeah.
And so I'm grateful to you all for putting together the Greater Goodies every year. I have to ask, do the winning films get an award of some kind? Do you give out a little statuette to the producer or something?
That would be a lot of fun, but no, we're not that big. It's largely symbolic.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
I'm sure that they're lying in bed feeling really good about themselves, knowing that they received a greater goodie, but
There you go.
I think
Yeah, that would be
very
fun to
cool.
produce a little statuette and
Yeah, we can 3D print them,
there you go.
mail them to the studios. Congratulations.
I mean personally, if I had made one of these films and won one of these awards, I would feel really good about it. You know, gosh,
Yeah.
we have a positive message here.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I will name the award and the film that won it, and and then ask you to sort of elaborate a little on why they were picked for
Great.
that award. Okay. So
Great.
here we go. So first we have the Vulnerability Award, and that went to All of Us Strangers.
Yeah. So this film is about a man. His name is Adam. And when we first encounter him, he's a kind of reflection in the window. And it's very clear to us in the first scenes of the movie that this is a very isolated and alienated person, a very self-contained person. Um, and the story that unfolds from that really explores, I mean, first of all, it explores how he got that way. Uh, but then what makes it greater goody worthy is that it shows how he manages to sort of get himself out of that situation. And the reason we gave it the vulnerability award is because he gets himself out of that situation by opening up
Mm,
to the people he loves and who love him.
beautiful. I like that phrase, greater goody worthy. Greater goody worthy. It's fun to say.
Yeah,
So yeah. Well, that's a great message about connection. There's I think there's a great deal of work out there now that supports this idea that humans sort of need connection to thrive, right? So that is definitely a positive aspect of ourselves. Number two, we have the Thought Provoking Complexity Award, and that went to American Fiction.
yeah. So to me, this was such an important film. American Fiction is about a writer named Thelonious Monk Ellison, or just Monk. And he writes novels, and he's also a fiction professor, and he comes from a quite privileged background. And one of the things that sort of fascinated me about the movie is that he's kind of he's not a perfect hero. He's kind of a snob. He's kind of stuck up and full of himself a little bit, and maybe even a little narcissistic. And the novels he writes are very literary, and are read by relatively small audiences. And he's struggling to build his audience. And he begins to realize that other Black writers are succeeding by writing what he calls trauma porn. So, tales about slavery and racism and the inner city and the police. And he doesn't relate to any of that. And and this is not really a spoiler. I think this is kind of the premise of the movie. He writes a novel that he thinks of as being satire of that kind of trauma porn. And the novel just becomes wildly successful. And what's fascinating about the movie, and what I don't want to give away, is the ways that that complicates his life, and complicates his connection to himself, his connection to the woman he's dating, his connection to other Black people. The movie just becomes more and more and more complicated until finally, by the end, we don't know where it's going to go. And to me, it's just a really fascinating exploration of how complicated life can be. Um, it's also about racism. It's also about the media. Uh, and you can certainly watch it that way. But to me, it was really a fascinating film about just how complicated we can be, any of us.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
contradictions that we can hold within ourselves, and how we have to sort of find a way to live with those contradictions. That's what Monk is trying to do in the movie. And we as the viewers have to try to live with the contradictions we see in him as the primary character. So that's why we gave it the thought-provoking complexity award.
And he is a complex character.
He's
That was
really,
one of the things I loved about that film is how rich he is as a character. He is a really interesting character
yeah,
study.
yeah. He's not likable. I mean, to me anyway.
Mm,
Um, and yet he is likable. He's the hero for a reason. I think that the film captures him at a point in his life where there's just a lot of challenges, and I don't want to give this part away for people who haven't seen the movie. Um, and you sort of see the worst in him come out, but you also see the best,
mhm.
and you see him struggling to be at his best, and to live in integrity with himself, and often failing. And to me, that felt like the most truthful part of the movie, because that's how it is in life. Like, we try to be at our best, and we often fail. And so then what do you do? Um,
Right.
a really fascinating question.
Right. So such like I say, very rich, a very rich reflection on that individual. He's
Yeah,
got a great arc.
yeah,
Um, Number three, the Embracing Multiple Identities Award went to Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
yeah. So I haven't seen this movie. This was written about by a 21-year-old research assistant at the Greater Good Science Center, Layla
Mhm.
Rosenberg. She wanted to write about it, and I said, sure, go for it. And what she talks about in her little mini review is what she chooses to focus on. And again, I haven't seen the movie. I haven't even read the book. Um, is the protagonist, Margaret, it's me, Margaret, her struggle to reconcile her Jewish identity with her Gentile identity, and how that interfaith marriage has affected her family. Um, and I think for Layla, this really resonated for her. And it's what
Mhm.
she, wanted to talk about. And I found it very compelling. Maybe I'll see it someday.
Yeah, my wife is a huge fan of the novel by Judy Blume, and often talks about how important it was to her in her formative years, and
Yeah,
just loved the movie. And she shares some, I think maybe like the author of the piece, shares some of those identity traits with the character,
yeah,
and interfaith, parents,
yeah.
and so yeah, this is definitely one that my wife loved it so much she invited my daughter to sit down, my teenage 13-year-old daughter to sit down
Oh,
and watch it with her, and they sort of bonded over the movie, which I thought was beautiful.
yeah,
Um,
cool.
and then moving on, we have I mean, this is a great one. Number four, the Find Yourself Award, which
Yeah,
went to Barbie.
Barbie.
We
Yeah, so
whoever
Barbie,
I think many of us loved this movie last year.
yeah, I mean, it was such I've seen it twice. I didn't write about
Same.
it. Our contributor Joanne Chen wrote about it. But I've seen it twice, with two different groups of people. And, I think the number one thing you have to say about this movie is that it just delights audiences. I think that's why it was such a successful movie in the theaters. So you could it just had this tremendous, both times I saw it, which, by the way, one time I saw it in Oakland, California, and the other time I saw it in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Interesting.
And in both theaters, you could just feel the energizing effect it had on audiences. Like, people reacted very strongly to it. They laughed, they cried. Um, and I just thought it was very clever. Uh, and we gave it the Find Yourself Award because that's, at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. Like, you have these different characters. There's Barbie, um, uh, there's well, there's different Barbies, right? there's Ken, played by Ryan Gosling. There's the character played by America Ferrera and her daughter. And they all kind of, they're all sort of struggling to figure out exactly who they are,
Yeah.
in often in relation to each other. Um, and it's really kind of about that struggle to me. This is my idiosyncratic point of view, but the interesting thing about the movie is that, you know, other people are always trying to define us.
Mm,
And Barbie as a doll is kind of the ultimate, um, sort of shaped plastic object. The thing that is created for other people's pleasure and engagement. And the character of Barbie, stereotypical Barbie, um, by the end of the film, transcends that. She sort of arrives at a place of individuality.
mm,
Um, but she doesn't reject her connections to other people, which I think is very interesting. It's a very individualistic film, but um, it's not antisocial.
sure.
It like her relationship with Ken actually remains kind of important. And one of the things that happens when she finds herself gradually is that she arrives at a place of compassion for Ken, like starts to see him as a person. And in that way, I think Ken sort of gets helped along to see himself as being a separate, important person who is not defined by Barbie.
Sure.
Um, and to me, that's just it was a wonderfully, clever and complex movie and hilarious.
I love comedies, and it's such a treat to see a comedy win a meaningful award like this. And I really think the Find Yourself Award, I mean, so many people have said so many things about this film, but I really think your award hits the nail on the head. There when you pull back all the layers of what's going on in the movie,
Yeah,
ultimately it is a journey of self-discovery,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
And there's a great empathy theme at play too, I think,
Yeah,
because we see Barbie and Ken become sort of gain more empathy for one another as the movie moves along. And sort of develop a richer understanding of what is the world of Barbie, right? And
yeah,
where do each of these characters fit into it?
yeah.
Because Ken has his own identity crisis too, and goes on his own
It does.
journey of self-discovery. So yeah, a
Yeah,
lot, a lot happening in that comedy, which is just wonderful.
yeah,
Moving on, number five, we have the Adaptation Award, which went to Elemental,
yeah.
an
Uh,
animated film.
yeah. Yes, and I haven't seen this movie. There's another one I haven't seen. My friend Aurelia Santos wrote about it, she's an immigrant. And for her, this was very much an immigrant story, and it was about sort of finding yourself in a place where you weren't born, where you don't really understand the people, and then gradually adapting to that environment. And to me, that just seemed like a beautiful message.
Number six, the Community Against Catastrophe Award, Godzilla minus one.
Okay, this one I saw. And I wrote about this one. It's a Godzilla movie. There's a big radioactive lizard uh, in the movie who stomps Tokyo, as is traditional with Godzilla
Sure.
movies.
hmm What we
Um,
sort of all go to see, right?
yeah. But wow, this movie shocked me.
Wow.
There was so much more going on than just Godzilla stomping Tokyo. It is a very human scale story about a young man who, at the beginning of the film, is a kamikaze pilot who is faking a mechanical malfunction so he doesn't have to go to his death.
Mm,
And in all of this, by the way, everything I'm about to say happens in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. There's no spoilers here. Um, and when Godzilla initially appears, the kamikaze pilot is completely overwhelmed by fear. He needs to do something to defend himself, and his comrades against Godzilla, and he fails to do that. And so, very unexpectedly, Godzilla minus one starts as an exploration of failure and shame. When the pilot goes back to his home, it's completely ruined by the war in
Mhm.
World War II.
Mhm.
And everybody hates him because he's a failed kamikaze pilot. He didn't,
Oh,
come through the war with honor. He comes back as a symbol of Japan's failure in World War II. And, the movie is about, God, there's so much going on in this movie. It's about how he overcomes his own sense of shame, but it's also about how the people around him gradually come back together. And, and they're very disillusioned. They're disillusioned with Japan, they're disillusioned with themselves. And the movie's really about how they overcome that. And they sort of overcome that by facing this threat from Godzilla, a giant monster. Um, and in the end, it's actually a very inspiring film about how, these values of discipline and cooperation make it possible for them to rebuild in the wake of the war. And God, yes, there's a giant radioactive lizard, but that giant radioactive lizard is symbolic of a lot of things that are
mhm.
very difficult to articulate because of the shame and the sense of failure that are involved.
This was one that my brother saw in the theaters.
Mm.
He and I grew up watching Godzilla movies, and he and I were talking. He's like, "Matt, you got to see this movie. It's so good." He just loved it. He loved it, and my brother's not a big movie buff, so that really surprised me to hear him get so excited about it.
Yeah,
And it's definitely what I'm waiting for on streaming, what I want to see. And then we get to a movie I've been looking forward to talking about. Number seven, the Choose Kindness Award, such a fitting award, goes to The Holdovers.
yeah. So I haven't seen this one. My colleague Jill Seti wrote about it.
Mhm.
And basically, my read on this film, as she describes it, is that and you tell me, like, it just seems filled with very difficult people
Yes.
who gradually learn to see each other and be kind to each other. You tell me, is that true?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I actually have a friend who this was one I recommended on social media, and a friend chimed in to say, it's funny. I actually, it's my sister. She chimed in to say, I put it on and I watched the first little bit and turned and walked out of the room.
Uh,
And she said,
yeah,
after
because it's so
reading
unpleasant.
what you wrote about it, it makes me want to go back and give it another try. And that was exactly my reaction to the movie. They are so combative in the beginning, it's hard to watch. They're
Yeah,
so at each other's throats.
yeah,
And it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, you
yeah.
know. And then as the movie progresses, as they get to know each other, this this sympathy, this empathy starts to grow,
Yeah.
right? They start to find common ground. This teacher and this student, who are so different, do start to find some way to, I mean, I don't mean to overstate it, but sort of some way to love each other, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
um, so often in life, I think what helps enrich our lives is some sort of a loving connection, you know, and that's what develops in these characters. And it's beautiful. It's really, I mean, that's a little bit of a spoiler,
Yeah.
for me to say that because it comes along later in the movie, but it's really beautiful. I loved that movie. I could watch it again and again. It's so
Uh,
good.
all right. Well, I'll have to watch it.
I highly recommend it. Number eight, the Musical Hero Award,
Yeah.
One Love, about
Yeah.
Bob Marley.
Barb Marley. So the author of this one, Michelle Holder, is herself Jamaican.
Oh,
And
neat.
I think she was very inspired by this movie. And I think part of the inspiration for her is that, she wrote another article for us about, I think we titled it Seven Complicated Lessons in Jamaica, from Jamaica about Happiness.
Oh,
Um, you know, I think, you know, and that piece is about how for her growing up in Jamaica, it was a very complicated place because there was a lot of poverty and a lot of social stresses. And that for her existed, what she talks about in the article is how that existed in tension with Jamaica's reliance on tourism and its image as the kind of a don't worry, be happy place.
Mm,
And I think she
mm,
was attracted to this film partially because it explores that tension
uh,
um, between, you know, this kind of aspirational happiness and this complicated reality through the life of Bob Marley. And, you know, and she uses the film as an opportunity to address that, but also to talk about the significance of music in our
mm,
well-being. Um, and you know, she sort of, for her, the movie is a celebration of Bob Marley as as a complex figure,
uh,
but a hero and a person who exemplifies a lot of positive aspirational qualities. But also, it's about, you know, how music can really bring human beings together,
mm.
and you know, sort of glimpse a better world where we can express the full range of our humanity.
This is definitely one I want to see. I've been waiting for it to come to stream. I'm a streamer of films. I tend to want to watch them on my couch,
Yeah,
and I've been waiting for this one to come to streaming because I'm a fan of Bob Marley. You know, his song "Three Little Birds" has been very uplifting for me over the years. You
yeah,
know, and his I like the themes of his music about love and hope and connection. You
yeah.
know, so yeah, definitely one I'm looking forward to. Number nine, the Acceptance Award for Past Lives.
Right. Yeah, so past lives, I think a lot of people really wish this one could have won the Best Picture Oscar. It didn't. I think that it was a little too quiet, a little too small and independent, a little too Asian in its orientation. Let's just be honest. I think that, you know, for the Academy Awards, that was very challenging. Um, but you know, it's about a young girl growing up in South Korea and a young boy, and they connect in childhood, and then their lives go in different directions, and yet they still keep coming back to each other. And you know, I think for all of us as we live our lives, we can think of forks in the road, you know, times where we had decisions to make about, you know, where we would live, where we would go to school, decisions about our friendships, decisions about who we would partner with and marry, whether we have children or not. And this movie is very haunted by the lives that could have been had we made different choices. And I think for a lot of people that can be very troubling. You know, that can the paths not taken can weigh on us very heavily. And the movie's about how one young woman comes to accept choices that she's made in the life that she lives. And that's why we gave it the acceptance award.
This one reminded me a little, just the trailer for it reminded me a little of Sliding Doors. Do you remember that one?
Yes, yes, yes. Very
You
much
know,
in
the
that
sort
vein.
of the path not taken, right? What
That's it.
might have been.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one that I definitely want to see, but have not had the chance to see yet. And it looks like almost a story of longing,
Yeah.
right? A little bit of like you say, like what could have been.
Yeah, well, and
Um,
it's about living with longing, like feeling
mm,
longing and being at peace with it.
I suppose, you know, we all have to make choices in life, right?
Yeah.
And how can you sort of not at some point in your life think of what might have been had you made
Yeah.
choices differently or if things had worked out differently?
Yeah.
Number 10, the Perseverance Award goes to
Right.
Rustin.
Right. So this is a film about Bayard Rustin, who was a very key figure in the 1960s civil rights movement, and you know, and he was gay, um, and only somewhat in the closet. That part's a little unclear to me. Um, and it's just about like how as a black gay man, he had to sort of fight battles within the civil rights movement as he was fighting a battle for civil rights for Black people. Um, my colleague Jill Sutty wrote about this movie and, really focuses on how he faced like so many barriers and overcame them and, led a very successful movement that changed the entire United States on multiple fronts. We live in a world now where, um, you know, a lot has changed for Black folks, but a lot has changed for gay folks as well, for gay men. And, in a lot of ways, this movie is about the beginnings of that change, or at least a certain point in time when that change was happening.
Yeah, that's a really compelling story.
Yeah.
Um, Number 11, the Overcoming Shortcomings Award goes to aptly
Shortcomings.
titled Shortcomings.
Yeah. So this is based on a graphic novel called Shortcomings.
Oh,
And, and as I say in my write-up, it's about a very average guy going through a very ordinary, messy breakup. But but it's really like so I really loved this movie. It was a small independent film uh, that I think not a lot of people have seen. But I thought it was very, very clever. And it, like the holdovers, actually, I think a lot of the people in this movie are very unpleasant to each other. Um, and I think it's kind of hard to get through. Like the protagonist, whose name is Ben, is just so deeply unpleasant. You just want to scream at the movie and say, Ben, for the love of God, just be nice. You're really alienating everybody around you, and you should just make an effort to like just be nicer to people. And the movie doesn't offer, you know, this is not the kind of movie where by the end, Ben is a completely different person. But what happens is that he becomes a lot more accepting of other people's shortcomings.
mm,
And you can really see that over the course of the movie. And I think his own story, is kind of unresolved by the end, but you can see the change starting to happen in him. Um, and in that respect, it's really I think a very beautiful film, although I'm not sure that, everybody will be able to appreciate it because it's very nuanced. The Holdovers, which I haven't seen, really struck me as having a very definite trajectory for its main characters. I think that Shortcomings is, a lot more sort of boxed in and a little less inspiring. And yet I think that it explores something that, for me anyway, really resonated, which is that, we all have shortcomings.
mm.
We all have problems. And there's a definite relationship psychologically. Actually, I'm going to refer back to the science now. I will say that this is true throughout psychological science. Like there's a relationship between accepting other people's shortcomings and accepting our own. The
Mm.
more compassion we can have for ourselves, the more we can have for other people. The more we can have for other people, the more likely we are to have compassion for ourselves. There's a lot of research showing that this is the case. And in a lot of ways, this movie illustrates that.
I wonder, do you know, has any research ever been done on do we become more forgiving as we get older? I just wonder.
We published an article about that, and I would have to go back and look at the article to give a definitive answer. Um, but it makes sense that we would. I mean, you know, it's difficult to talk about like throughout social science. There's a kind of dilemma that shows up in a number of different ways. You can look at different age groups and see how they feel about, in this case, forgiveness or gratitude or, and you can ask yourselves questions like, are, older people more grateful and forgiving? Are younger people? You can ask similar questions about happiness. The problem is we don't always know if this is developmental. In
Mm.
other words, if this is something that happens over the course of lifetimes around the world,
Uh,
or if this is something that is specific to how those generations were shaped and the values they came up with and the experiences that they had on a collective level.
Interesting.
Oftentimes those things that causality is very difficult to tease out.
Sure.
Um, it's something we run up against again and again.
Yeah, there, I suppose there's an element of sociology in there, right? Like to what degree is this an individual
Yeah,
characteristic, and to what degree is this how a certain generation in a certain society moves, right?
yeah, yeah,
Finally, we have the Compassion Award for the Society of Snow.
yeah. I didn't see this one yet. I want to see it. My colleague Margaret Golden wrote about it. And what she talks about is, I mean, it centers on a disaster, a plane crash, something that actually it's based on a true story. It's based on something that actually happened that has actually been filmed a number of times. And what she argues in her write-up is that this film is unusual in that it really explores the individual stories of all of the people that were involved in this disaster.
Mhm.
Uh, and through by talking about these people as like individuals, we really come to empathize with the dilemmas that they faced. And we can see the compassion they had for each other and trying to help each other survive.
I really liked her write-up on this one.
Yeah.
I have to say, I when I saw it was about that Andy's flight again, I was like,
Mhm.
really
Yeah, yeah.
another movie?
She addresses that at the outset. She's like, "Oh
Gosh.
my God, do we really need another movie about this?" Yeah,
But her write-up is compelling.
yeah,
And my knee-jerk reaction was not to want to see it
yeah.
because
Me
I've
too.
seen movies on that
Yeah,
issue, that topic before, and
yeah.
boy, she's her write-up was so good. I thought, boy, I'm drawn to
Might have to see it. Yeah,
that story she's talking
I, I
about there.
I had the same reaction, but after and I had the exact same reaction. I was like, I don't need to see this movie. I read her write up, and then I was like, all right, maybe I need to see this movie.
The same. Yes,
You know,
absolutely. Well, you had a lot of contributors on this one. This might be the most contributors I've ever seen on a Greater Good article.
we always do, and part of the reason for that is that over the years, I think that when we originally started doing the Greater Goodies, we drew pretty heavily from just our staff. And one thing I realized as time went on is that our staff was too homogenous. We
Mm,
were all sort of the same educational level, we were
interesting.
all we weren't all white, but we were predominantly white. And I gradually realized that if we wanted to really create a very rich picture of the year in movies, we had to diversify the contributors as much as possible. And so I have a list of people who might contribute to this article, and it's intentionally diverse in a lot of ways.
Mm,
And yeah, and I think that gets really reflected in the choice of movies and the way they're written about and makes it better.
fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, I really thought that there was a diversity of awards, a diversity of
Yeah,
films, diversity of representation, right? When we think of representation in Hollywood, representation in films,
yeah,
we had different minority groups represented in things.
yeah.
Well, this I hope our conversation will encourage more people to go out and see some of these movies, because there really are some fantastic movies in this list. And I hope our conversation will encourage more people to check out Greater Good Magazine,
Well, thank you
because
very
you all
much.
are doing some fantastic work over there, and it's such a pleasure to get to talk to you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming on the show. And maybe I can come up with an excuse to have you back in the future.
Great. Oh, I'd love
Thanks
to
so
do that.
much. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. This brings us to the end of episode 5 of It Matters How We Treat One Another. If I was going to give a special mention to a movie from 2023, it would be for the film A Million Miles Away. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It came out last year. That's the story of Jose M. Hernandez, a Mexican American astronaut who was played in the film by the always engaging Michael Pena in probably the most serious role I've ever seen him in. And I think what is so beautiful about that movie, and how it shows the best in humanity, is its depiction of human perseverance. And I don't want to give anything away, but it definitely shows a lot of perseverance. So be sure to add that one to your must see list too. Here are your takeaways from this episode. First, there is such a thing as too much gratitude. Believe it or not, consider having a gratitude practice that you do just 2 or 3 times a week, so not to overdo it. Two, good news, we're not born racist. Racism has to be learned, and if we can learn it, then that means we can unlearn it too. It is good for us to meet and get to know lots of different kinds of people. Empathy and compassion are important human characteristics. They help to create connection, and we as humans thrive on connection. Next, kindness matters. That seemed to be a recurring theme in the movies we heard about today, the theme of kindness. And finally, to view the article about the movies discussed today, and for more great articles from Greater Good magazine, please visit greatergood.berkeley.edu. Please subscribe to keep up with all of our episodes, and you can support the show by shopping our Etsy store at etsy.com/shop/it matters merch. That's It Matters merch. There's a link in our description. Your quote for this week, we always end with a quote, and your quote for this week is, quote, "I believe empathy is the most essential quality of civilization," end quote. That is fittingly from film critic Roger Ebert. Be sure to catch our next episode, which will be a special episode to be released on March 31st, which is International Trans Day of Visibility. And remember, treat everyone with kindness, respect, empathy, and compassion. And try for acceptance and love whenever possible. Be well, and much love to you all. Thanks.